My name's Mary Milton, as you've just heard, and I've worked on a variety of things. I mean, I've worked on quite a lot of observational documentaries, which I must say are my favourite thing, and they're a little bit out of vogue at the moment, so there's less of that around. There's still some great ones though, and also a lot of, I do a lot of bread and butter TV stuff, which if any of you are budding recordists and working in telly, you might end up doing. The Country Files and the Floggets and all of that kind of thing of this world. So I know a little bit about that as well. So to overlap with Larry a little bit from this morning, this first set of clips are nothing I recorded, I'm proud to say, and I've entitled them Why You Need a Brain Attached to Your Microphone. Please, take it away, Rob.
The train company First Great Western says it's dealing with some of the worst conditions in a decade. The Environment Agency is urging people to remain vigilant and to stay away from swollen rivers. Jeremy Cook is in Congsbury in Somerset. Jeremy.
George, I have to say there's growing... Even before tonight's predicted downpour, the misery has...
Halloween, and what do polar bears like at Halloween? And we're joined by Linda. And first of all, the name of the three polar bears?
Inukshuk's the one in the water, Nikita, and Aurora.
Okay, now the water is cool, but I know Inukshuk loves it.
We hope he does.
Be like, okay, here we go. We've got 3 pumpkins, and I think Inukshuk's going to get the first one. 3, 2, 1. Now, will they eat the whole pumpkin?
We hope so.
Oh, look, it's floating. Okay, will the girls go in the water?
Well,
I don't know. They're looking at you.
Not.
Here we go. I got one. Ladies, 1, 2, 3. Inukshuk might go for that one. Don't worry, ladies. I got one more. Here we go, ladies. 3, 2, 1. Oh.
Did his mic go in? He threw his mic in.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes. Es cierto que aquí hace en torno a menos 4 o 5 grados en la Sierra de Madrid, pero la verdad es que el sol aprieta bastante fuerte y hace que la sensación térmica sea muchísimo mayor. Además, hemos estado preguntando por aquí a toda esta gente que ha venido, mucha gente a divertirse a la nieve, y nos están diciendo que hace hasta calor, y eso es porque no paran de moverse montaña arriba, montaña abajo y, por supuesto, jugando con los trineos. De hecho, vamos a hacer la prueba, nos vamos a subir aquí con Irene y a darnos un pequeño paseo. ¡Ay, mi cámara! A ver quién le da la cámara. El frío.
Did you like those? It's always good to start with a laugh, isn't it? Anyway, there's probably no coincidence that they're all news clips. 2 of them featured weathermen. They're the sort of environment where often there isn't anybody in between the microphone and the recorded sound. There's no one even monitoring it. That's also, incidentally, how Gordon Brown got caught out calling some old lady a bigot when he got in his car. Because there was, in most circumstances, had that been a documentary, his radio mic would probably have been faded down when he got into the car, because you'd know as it drove off it would break up. So, we got that bit of sound courtesy of someone not monitoring it. Now, those are obviously fairly flippant, and you saw them all coming probably, with the exception of the first one. This second sort, I've got a lot of clips, so if people would rather talk, stick your hand up and ask me something and I'll talk to you. I'm hoping that you'll talk to me. This second clip is from a really good documentary called 100% White, which was made by a filmmaker called Leo Regan. It's a follow-up to, he was originally a photographer, and he took photographs of some right-wing guys who have tattoos that say things like 100% white. And as a follow-up to that, years later, he went back to film them to see if any of their quite extreme views had changed. But again, he did this as a one-man band. So this is no critique of him, actually, but it's some of the problems that are presented if you haven't got anybody monitoring and in charge of that sound. So here's a little clip from 100% White.
In his own way, Neil's outlook has also moved on.
He wants it from 8 o'clock until 8 o'clock the next day morning. So you're going to have to be running around.
Oh yeah,
so you want some decent money for it, really, don't you?
Oh yeah, definitely. Even with break. But yes, definitely. Enjoy a meal.
Thanks a lot.
I don't want to live next door to him and his mother and his grandmother and his grandmother's aunties, uncles, kids and all that. And I'd rather it not be in my country. But there's fuck all I can do about it, I've tried. So I'm just trying to get on with my life. The best way I can without any going in there. What's the point of going in there? And fucking plucky bastards and all this fucking thing. There's no point.
But is there a part of you, Neil, now, honestly here, honest answer, is there a part of you that is worried about what your old cronies will think?
Oh yeah, I do, yeah. I think, oh yeah, well, they're going to think I'm a fucking right race traitor and they're going to think I'm fucking sold out and all this. But fuck them, I don't give a fuck, man, I'm me.
Go away, we're not in! Okay, go and sort it out. So I'm just coming.
What's going on, Carla?
Nothing.
What's changed since we last spoke?
I don't know. When did we last speak?
Yesterday.
Oh, yeah. Well, I agreed to go out with him last night for a drink. And I didn't come home till early as this morning. We had a good night out.
No.
We're not back together. I was going to use him for sex and things.
Whoops. Sorry.
Dave?
Whoa. Big ball.
After 10 months with Colin and Carla, I'm beginning to feel that I'm no closer to understanding how Colin's life and beliefs have moved on.
I have changed in some ways, but not in others. And it's the ways I haven't changed in that I want to rectify. In the ways I have changed, I think I've changed for the better. I've just got to be able to prove that now. I feel better by not having to beat about the bush with Carla and hide things and lie to her for something stupid, and then 6 months later it explodes out of all proportion and ends up being something completely and utterly major. You know what I mean? That's what happens. You know, you tell one silly little lie, and before you know it, you know, your marriage is on the line. I've just got to be able to prove to Carla now that I've changed in them ways, and that's what I'm aiming at. But I feel better myself because I know I have.
Can I ask something here now? It's a little bit sensitive, I think. I would assume it's a sensitive subject for you, Colin. In your previous relationship, you had a relationship with a half-caste woman. Is this true? What was that about? Hold on a minute. Hang on a minute. No. Let's not do it like this.
Let him calm down, Leah. He'll be right. He'll be all right.
That's got quite a lot of the sound recordist's main enemies in it, I'd say. And he was there trying to tackle that on his own. You've got the things that you can think about. There's things like all her jangly jewellery, which would have been a bit of a nightmare for any sound recordist. There's things like the little zip on his jacket that blows up and down in the wind. You could stick that down with a bit of double-sided sticky tape, bit of wig tape. It's always handy to have around with you with stuff like that. And there's the wind, obviously. I mean, it was actually quite atmospheric in that piece at the end when he's thinking. So, I mean, in a way, I suspect Leo's left that in to fill that pause, and it is quite dramatic. But you know, you wouldn't really want that amount of wind noise on your recordings. It's, you know, it's affecting the intelligibility of your speech, so that there's quite a lot of you know, that going on because he's working as a single operator. He probably wasn't even monitoring the sound. Forgive me, Leo, if I'm wrong there. And also the scene right at the beginning in the cafe, I suspect he was working, you could see a radio mic on the main protagonist there, and then everything else is either being picked up as spill onto that radio mic, or it's a camera mic, which is obviously working better when it's pointed at the waiter to pick up the waiter than it is when you move away and then you hear the sound dip on the waiter. So you're not getting the whole story. But the way that he's had to work, he's had to choose where his mics are going to go. He's using a camera with 2 sound inputs in, as most of them have. The one that's filming me is probably exactly the same. So you make your choice of what you're going to put into those 2 holes in the back of your camera. And that's what he's done. Has anyone got any questions about that before I kind of move on? Because I imagine some of you might be making films in that kind of way. Or we'll come back to that later. Oh, yes?
I think if you get something like the peaking when the wind's hitting the mic, does that, for some people, make it illegal for like broadcast or for distribution? If there's sounds like that on the soundtrack, does that cause problems?
Well, that was, I think, a Channel 4 film, and it was broadcast on Channel 4. So I think, you know, exceptions are made about what's acceptable, but I would imagine that depends on the powerfulness of the material. You know, technical quality obviously is something that, me as a sound recordist, I'm going to go for the best technical quality that I could get. But if you've got an amazing scene, Larry might have an opinion on this as well, but you know, if you've got an amazing scene and there's some problems with the sound, it might still be considered okay to broadcast. So you know, that's what do you think, Larry?
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, in the cutting room, you try to decide. At first, you might say it's not good enough, but then there would be the argument that it's powerful and should be included. I think that could have been improved through some sound editing. There was no need to play it raw, but then that's another decision.
Was that the version that was broadcast?
Yes.
And they didn't put a bass cut on it or anything?
That was what was broadcast. Wow. As far as I know, I got that film from Leo, so I can't imagine that I've been given a different version to what was broadcast.
But that could have been cleaned up a bit.
Yeah.
If they wanted to.
Right.
Maybe they didn't want to.
I think, you know, it's interesting talking about that, because the next piece I'm going to show it's another one of Leo's films, and it's one that I did work on. And we'll just show the first clip that I've got first, Rob, up until where it fades to black. And Leo makes all sorts of films. He makes things that are drama or drama-like, and he makes documentaries. So I'll just show you this clip and just ask the question, is it drama or is it a documentary?
Cooey. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Yeah, I'm back. You're a failure. You're useless. You're stupid. Your life's not worth living, and you know it. So do exactly what I say. Go and get a knife and slash your wrists. In fact, before you do that, I've got another little plan for you. Kill somebody else. Go out in style. Go on, you can do it. You'll get some relief from this useless life you're living. Go on, do it. That's what it's like to hear voices. Not nice, eh?
Dr. Rufus May thinks hearing voices can be a good thing. He's a maverick psychologist, and last week Ruth Fielding came to see him for the first time. Ruth's a junior doctor who's hearing a voice telling her to kill herself.
This station is East Finchley. This train terminates at High Barnet.
Most doctors would say Ruth is a danger to herself and others and have her sectioned. Rufus is different. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with madness.
Give me a bit of space, Leo.
Rufus May is one of the most controversial doctors working in the NHS today. He thinks all mental hospitals should be shut down, that there's no such thing as schizophrenia, and that medication destroys lives. He says we should learn to love mad people. He does. He was mad himself once.
How many voices are you hearing?
One.
Is it male or female? Look at me, Ruth. Is it male or female?
Male.
What kind of things is it saying? What's it saying, Ruth?
It's telling me to kill myself and ways to do it.
Well, you don't have to do what it says. You've got a choice. Yeah?
I can't be a doctor and hear voices.
To protect Ruth's identity, an actor is used to tell her story, and some details have been changed. Everything you see with Ruth is based on original transcripts recorded over 12 months. Everything else is documentary footage, filmed as it happened.
So that's a kind of, well, I mean, did you know what it was before the caption came up? It's a fusion between documentary and drama. And a lot of people were very confused when they saw it. They didn't know whether it's real or not. I had somebody email me and tell me that I'd outed who Ruth really was on my website because of something that I'd written. But something that I'd written was about the actress. You know, and they said, you can't use her real name, so that's the actress's name, that's not the name of the doctor. You know, it was confusing to that point. But when we did that, Leo had already shot a lot of material with the doctor and the patient. The doctor is the real doctor. The psychiatrist is the real psychiatrist, and the doctor who's hearing the voices is an actress. When it was broadcast under the title The Doctor Who Hears Voices. Mental was a working title. And I looked at some of the stuff that he'd shot, and I think we've got a little bit of that later on. I've got another clip with that on. And the idea was that obviously I wanted to record the best sound I possibly could, but it also had to match what he'd already shot, which he'd shot in the same way as 100% White, with a mic on the camera and a radio mic on various people. That will be moved from person to person, just one microphone. So I was trying to kind of reach this middle ground where I was happy with the quality of the sound that I was delivering him, but also it wasn't going to like really jar when you went between the documentary and the reconstructions, so that Ruth was a believable character. So we talked a lot about when mics would be visible in shot and when they wouldn't be. And we talked about how Leo had filmed it initially and whether he'd turned up and a situation was happening and he just used his mic on his camera, and at what point he then might have grabbed one of the characters and said, I want to put a radio mic on you now. So sometimes I was recording using radio mics, but they would, because that was the best way of getting the sound in that situation, but they would be concealed and you don't see them. Other times, there would be radio mics I was actually using and they're visible. Sometimes there were 2 mics on the person. There was one that was buried that was getting the sound I wanted to get. Because when you bury mics, you conceal, that helps you get rid of wind noise quite often. If someone's wearing a nice jumper that's kind of acoustically virtually transparent, but will defend the mic from some wind noise, you want your mic in there. That's one of the things that he wasn't able to do on 100% white, which is why that seemed so bad with the wind noise. So I would conceal a mic for that reason, but because he would have been shooting with one on the outside, I put one on the outside as well that was a prop. And I tried to match so it looked like the ones he had been using. And other times they've got mics on as props and I'm using a boom. So depending on the situation. And every time something went wrong and I said, I want another take, the sound wasn't very good, Leo said, great, it'll match what I did. So, so there's mistakes in there too. Anyway, I've got another clip that I think sort of shows that. There's a bit it's probably one of the more obvious documentary bits that he shot actually. The microphone isn't put on in a way I'd ever put on anybody. See, you'll spot it, see if you can.
You know, we can't afford it. We can't afford to lose you, Ruth. There's too many good people been lost. We don't need another one going. This just will help with the voice and with all that bombardment you were getting earlier on. You know, your senses were being bombarded. Just concentrate on your breathing. Concentrate on how the tree feels. Just count your breathing. So as you're breathing in 1, in your mind, breathing in 1, breathing out 1.
Trevor Turner has been working as a consultant psychiatrist for almost 20 years. I asked him how he would treat someone in Ruth's condition.
Most patients who have severe psychiatric symptoms that schizophrenics have, such as hearing voices or delusional beliefs or thinking your thoughts are being read, do respond to antipsychotic medication. It makes them better. It calms them down. It damps down the voices, sometimes eliminates the voices. It makes them to think more clearly, and it makes them feel less aroused and anxious. And over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, miracles occur.
You give someone a tablet, it shuts them up. It makes them dumb and stupid. People then have the ignorance to think the medication is making someone better. You're not making someone better, you're making them stupid. There's a big myth being promoted here that drugs are the answer. And the prescribers know it most of the time.
If you had persisting symptoms of a schizophrenic illness, didn't take medication, and tried to carry on, you would, from the studies we know that are pre-war, develop an impairment in your intellectual functioning. That's what we know about the illness.
You would get worse?
You would get well, you would certainly get worse, yes.
To keep busy, Ruth's got a part-time job in an old people's home. But she's starting to have some disturbing ideas about a fish tank in the day room. Rufus has been working with her for 3 months now, and he believes her delusions are normal. I'm starting to worry about both of them.
I work in the day room, there's a fish tank. And the bubbles come from the bottom, and they produce an ECG trace on it.
ECG?
You know, like a heart monitor. You know, monitors the heart rate and demonstrates the sort of electrical activity going on in the heart. Right. Yeah, maybe that was my purpose at my place of work. I was there to interpret these bubbles and what it meant. And
so the beginning and end of that were bits that I did, the bits in the kitchen and the bit up the tree, because they've got the actress in, and all of the rest was documentary stuff that that Leo had recorded previously, which we were sort of trying to match. The microphone on the doctor that was interviewed, that was all kind of all over the place, nothing to do with me, okay. Also, in the kitchen, if you notice, I mean, Leo's style is that he will ask questions from behind the camera. I mean, you saw that in 100% wide. And I recorded those on a boom, but kind of to try and make it sound like it was being picked up by the camera mic. So they, I can't remember whether I'd recorded them slightly off mic or whether they'd dip those in the mix afterwards, but it was to kind of make it feel. And I think those are the bits that work the best, actually, when he's interjecting questions, because it does make you feel more like it's a sort of a documentary rather than a drama. The bit in the tube was the same as well. I think he talks to Rufus, the psychiatrist. There's just one more little bit from this, which I'll let Rob play, which is another little scene from the dramatised bit.
If you're angry, you know, don't take it out on the lamppost, take it out on me, you know. Hit me. No, not really.
You want me to hit you? You want me to hit you?
Well, let's
Do I
spar.
have to hit you?
Pretend. Come on. Go on. Okay. Right. Okay, take it easy.
Stop. Keep your head down. They're watching up there.
Hey! Oh, that's really excellent.
That was one of those scenes where they actually had radio mics on, but they were concealed, because I spoke to Leo beforehand and he said, well, that was actually something that happened. We were recreating something that really happened, and that he had just joined Rufus somewhere. Rufus said, meet me somewhere. And he hadn't mic'd him up, and that was how it had happened. So we just went with that. So it's kind of, it's a bit of a fake. It's better sound than he would have got if he'd shot it at the time. But you can't see the mics on people, and that was, you know, whether it works or not, it's kind of up for debate, but that's the reason why we did that. And she was a lot further away from that lorry than it looked. Just put everyone's mind at ease. Has anyone got any questions about that? Because that's quite an unusual film and method of filmmaking. Oh, stunt. Oh, right.
When they were sparring,
yeah,
you didn't get a lot of like rustling noise so much. How did you avoid that? Where were your mics?
They were underneath. The Ruth's microphone was underneath her hoodie, probably about there, where mine is now. And Rufus's was probably in between the buttons of his shirt, which is where I normally put them. And it's, those are those things, it's like people would call it kind of like a dark art, really, of radio mic placement, because it depends on things like what the stuff's made out of that people are wearing. Generally, you know, you end up looking at people really oddly and thinking, well, what are you wearing? Where are the natural folds in the fabric? Where are there little gaps where you can put something where you don't think it will rub? Some people put a lot of tape and things in to try and stop clothing moving, and I've seen that work really well. But generally, for myself, I generally think less is more. The less you can put in there, the less there is to rub on stuff. So I kind of start with that, and if it doesn't work, move on to some other ideas like taping things or moving things around. But it is one of those things that kind of just doing it a lot, and some of those, you know, reality and sausage factory machine shows that I work on, where you get contributors coming at you all day, you mic them up, they talk to someone, they then go off, you get another person. You know, they're a great place to learn, because you see 20 people a day, you put microphones on them, they're wearing different things, they've got rattly jewelry, and you learn, you know. So it's to do it, and like sometimes you get it really wrong and you have to go back and move it, and other times you get it spot on first time, and sometimes there doesn't appear to be a difference between the two different methods. So no, that's not a complete answer, but the best one I can give. There was a question at the back, and then I'll come to you.
Have you ever been able to or would want to intervene earlier and sort of like say, oh well, would you mind, you know, you see the have you got a choice? You've got a choice of wearing this, that. Would you mind wearing that? Is there do you ever think to do that? Or?
Yeah, sometimes it's possible. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I do is sort of reality TV. In the kind of fly on the wall sort of sense, or little items with people. Sometimes what they're wearing is really important to them and they're not going to move it. when you're doing something that's a bit more dramatised, I can't remember if I got a say in what they wore on that particular occasion, but I'm sure if something had been a real problem, I could have intervened earlier. The thing is to do it early before it's been established. If your crinkly anorak is established as very important in scene 1 and they're going to wear it all the way through the film, you have to mention it before you shoot scene 1. Intervene if you feel you can. I've also on TV, lots of presenters sometimes turn up with more than one outfit, and sometimes I get a say. It depends how nice people are being, but you can push yourself forward. One there.
Yes, I just wondered what fixing you use, or is it different methods?
Different things. I mean, there were the very obvious ones that were clipped on outside, like the one I'm wearing, and I probably don't often use that because that's always very visible, and I try and hide things when I can. Occasionally, it doesn't matter, and it's not possible. You know, if people are wearing things that are very, very rustly, and sometimes it doesn't matter and you put things on the outside. Sometimes you can leave things out in plain sight, but they won't get noticed because you've matched a colour or you've managed to put it in the seam of a jacket or something like that. I'm quite a fan of, I use a personal mic. In fact, I'll go back a bit and say I'm not a great fan of radio mics in the first place because boom mics always sound better. But the trend seems to be to shoot things in a way that you can only use radio mics in a lot of ways, or they're just more convenient, or the world's so noisy you try and cut things down as much as possible by using personal mics. But I'm a fan of the Sanken COS 11 mics, and they come with a little rubber mount that you put a bit of double-sided sticky tape on, and you can stick that in all sorts of places. And conceal it. But I quite like that as a fixing. But also, Rycote also make similar things. It's a fabric and a bit sticky. They're called stickies, funnily enough. They go around lots of sorts of mics, and I quite often use those. So yeah. I used to use those a lot, but actually I prefer the little rubber mount, and they do make vampire clips now. They're clips, if people don't know, they've got like 2 little pins on them. That's why they're called vampire clips that clip on people. They can be good. They do now make them for the mic that I use, but they didn't initially. So again, in the kind of less is more, you know, actually sticking them onto people with tape and very little else sometimes gives them a low profile, so that there's either nothing rubbing on them, or you can put them somewhere where they're there but you can't see them. So, yes. Oh, there's a few. Shall I take you first and then Larry?
Yeah, just wanted to ask, are these problems, like in 100% White, that Leo has encountered, are they just inevitable? Could you be a one person shooting something and doing sound, or is it, are these problems, they just come up? Is there a way that he could have shot it that he could have avoided those problems?
He could have used the sound recordist, but that's not what you asked me. It is when you're using a camera that's only got 2 sound inputs, which they all have, basically. You have to make that decision of what you're going to use them for. Now, unless your film is only ever going to involve 2 people, and what they say is the most important thing in your film, and everything else you think you might add afterwards, or can deal with adding afterwards. And unless your film's like that, you're going to have to use the onboard camera mic or a boom somehow held by somebody on one of your tracks, which then leaves your other one for perhaps a radio mic, either on somebody, or the other thing is not to forget that radio mics don't have to be on people. You can leave them somewhere. There's a scene from Sisters-in-Law, which I'll show you later if we get time, where I couldn't get a microphone on the person I would have ideally liked it to be on, so I concealed it on the desk in front of where I knew they were going to sit. So if you've got a position, like in a court, for example, like in Sisters-in-Law, where you know lots of people are going to come and individually speak there, and that's going to be the most important place, put the microphone in the important place, not trying to move it between the 5 important people that are going to come there, because you'll never do it. In that particular example of 100% White, it's a bit difficult. I mean, the wind noise he could have maybe, you can get sort of furry covers for mics now, for personal mics that work fairly well. He could have done that, but then they're a lot more noticeable if you're having to put them outside. They're quite good in that sort of situation. Just sort of keeping an eye out for things that are going to be a problem. If your main character wears lots of bangles that jangle all the time, see if they might take all of them apart from one off. And if they won't, which sometimes, you know, sometimes those things, people feel it's part of them and they can't part with it, see if you can get them taped together or something that will make them less noisy. And just be aware when you're shooting of what might be a problem. I mean, try and monitor it is the thing. So at least you know when you've left somewhere with your beautifully shot material that you're very excited about, that the sound on it is telling the story that you want to tell. 'Cause it's about the story, isn't it? It's like, I don't want to advocate broadcasting, you know, crap sound, for want of a better term for it, but you know, it needs to be telling the story. And if the sound is letting you down, then you need to rethink how you do things. I mean, the thing that Leo could have done to not have that wind noise is not to shoot that scene outside. But his characters went outside. You know, would it be, oh, could you please have this discussion about your ex-girlfriend who, we would say dual heritage, but he said something else. Could you have that conversation inside, please, while I ask you this very poignant question? It's not going to happen, is it? Larry.
Just a comment about that. I think it's a lot to ask any sound recordist to get a perfect track in those kinds of conditions. I mean, it's really, there's so many things going on that you can't control. That I think even that scene that Leo did outside, you could have made that work and gotten rid of most of that wind sound and kept his voice, and it through very careful sound editing. So there is that you know, this track that you deliver doesn't have to be absolutely pristine.
And I suppose that's part of the skill as well, isn't it? Knowing, I sometimes think that part of my skill is knowing what you can get away with, and knowing when it's important to say, could we do that again? And there's documentary makers that never want to do anything again, for very, very valid reasons. Kim Longinotto never asks anyone to do anything again. You know, she follows a story, and if you don't get that piece, you don't get it. But then there's other ways of making documentaries where if you miss someone coming through a door, you just say, could you just go back and do that again? So it's also what documentary you're making.
Also wanted to ask you, do you ever put mics in the hair?
That's a good point, yeah, I have done that.
And it works?
Yeah, it does work. And also you can put things above people's ears as well. And like, you might think that's not the perfect place to be hearing someone from, but it will be consistent. Every time they turn their head, they're not ever going to be turning away from the mic because it's stuck to them. Yeah, a little bit of wig tape. You can put microphones in there, and then if someone's got a decent head of hair, you can then hide it.
Do you ever have phase issues when you're using multiple microphones?
Yes, but when I've had phase issues, it's normally because of microphones. Does everyone understand what phase issue is? I mean, right, okay. What can sometimes happen, it's happened to me because microphones have been incorrectly wired, that you get two sound signals that cancel each other out. So if you've got more than one microphone picking up the same sound, and it's what we call out of phase, generally because mics have been wired incorrectly, they can cancel each other out. So I've not had it other than in those sort of circumstances. You can get other sort of acoustic cancellation problems when you, for example, got, well, again, it's two microphones, whether they're radio mics or a boom and a mic, and a personal mic, radio mic, picking up the same source of sound, and then you might have to mix to make sure that the preferred sound that you want, the preferred microphone that you want to be picking up that sound, is what goes into the final mix. Larry's probably a better person to answer this, actually, but I mean, say for example, say if I've got a radio mic on you and I'm recording you asking me a question, and I've also got a boom here pointing at you, and it would be worse if you were further back. There might be, there'd be more of a delay of the sound coming to the boom mic than the one on you. So sometimes it's quite nice to mix those two things together and get an idea that you're further back. So you would have the choice of doing that, but sometimes when you mix those, it just sounds really, really wrong, because you're kind of, one is almost cancelling out the other, or you're getting an echo that sounds inappropriate. So you would hope that in the mix, and would make the decision to use one or the other.
Or you can correct it a bit.
Right.
You can pull them into phase.
Okay.
In small amounts.
This is Larry's area and not mine. My area would be that if I was going to do that, I would record them on 2 separate tracks, so that Larry had the choice to use one or the other, or mix them together, rather than create a problem by trying to put them both onto one track where I wasn't sure they were going to match. Does that answer your?
Yeah, no, it's just because when you had the two people each with a body mic, so as soon as they start kind of turning towards each other, if they're on separate tracks, then I guess it's okay. But then you can only invert the phase by 180 degrees. When they're actually kind of quarter way, what do you then do?
You can make it work. You can make small adjustments to the phase to make it work.
Right.
Yeah. It's usually not too much of a problem. You do hear it occasionally on broadcast. Yeah.
I would always try and keep those separate. Things like Sisters-in-Law. When I said I had it was a DAT machine that I was recording on. Then it was a little while ago, and I had 3 different inputs, but only 2 tracks to record on. So I would decide what was going to go onto what track, based on what I think would sit well together and not cause a problem. And what I also like, who I was able to see to know when to turn them up and down. I'll show a scene from that later, and I'll talk about that more.
If there's any unexpected raise in voice, or someone gets loud and starts shouting, obviously you can adjust a bit later with your action speed. But is there any way to kind of? I mean, my experience is limited to like using zooms and stuff like that. Not much more advanced equipment, but is there any way you can kind of split channels so that one channel's recording slightly lower from the same mic or something like that, just to avoid?
I've never done that. I mean, with a boom mic, which is one of the reasons why I really like them so much, is that you can reduce the level of somebody by just moving the mic a bit further away, rather than fiddling all the time and maybe turning background noise up and down. Because every time, if you set a level of where you think someone's going to talk and suddenly they get louder or quieter, it's worse, I suppose, when they get quieter, and you're cranking it up and up and up. You hear more and more background. You might hear more and more hiss, depending on what you're recording on and how good your mic is. So, with a boom, you can avoid making all those sudden changes by just moving the boom further away if they get louder, and as close as you can if they're really quiet. Don't know what other advice to give you about that, really. I've got some films where I've had to record music and people talking at the same time, and there's big changes in level of that, and you hear where I miss it, and I haven't turned it up. They've finished a bit of music, they start talking, and I'm like a little bit late. It is all about, it's about watching. And you get used to some people. Some people always speak like that. They always start loud and then they get quieter as they carry on talking. So you'll get to know the people that do that, and you'll start it lower and then you'll know to creep it up later. So watch. And the other thing is, when you're boom swinging and on a documentary and you don't know what's going to happen next, watch the people who aren't talking. It's a lot easier to tell who's going to start to talk in a conversation than to guess when someone's going to finish, because Larry might be talking to me and I might be here waiting to get in. You know that I'm going to try and speak as soon as I can. You won't get many cues off Larry about when he's going to stop, but you'll get cues off me as to when I'm going to start. So, yeah, it's watching.
It's sort of the idea of what you were talking about earlier about how sound guides the eye. The experience that I've had sometimes is that my sound person knows the important thing that's happening in a very busy room, but I don't know because I don't have that sound.
That's a really good point.
And I'm looking for the interesting image, and I'm looking for but actually I've missed something. Do you get it where the camera person or the director also has headphones, or how does it work?
I think, in my humble opinion, the the best way of working that is to trust your sound recordist. If your sound recordist is tapping you on the shoulder and going, it's over there, just go with it, go with it. I've done a lot of filming where there's been a third person involved because what we've been filming has been in a language that neither me or the camera person understands. And that makes it very, very clear, because you will then, if they're good, you'll have an interpreter going, it's there, there. And they will tell you, sometimes it's very obvious what you should be filming. Oh, look, they're fighting, better film that. Other times it's a little subtle thing that's going on, like you're saying, that you won't notice.
No, because you're as a camera person, you're looking visually.
Yeah, maybe it's not the fight, maybe it's the little child in the corner talking to her mother going, oh, Mum, I'm scared of the fight. Maybe that's, you know, maybe your sound recordist knows that. And I think you have to have a relationship with the people that you work with where they feel safe that they can point that out to you, and that when they point that out to you, you know that you can trust that that's the right decision. Yeah, you could have a pair of cans on, but that...
Not like working that way where somebody else is...
Oh, I'm fine, anyone can listen to anything. But, you know, how many jobs do you want to do at once? You know, you're already filming, you might be directing too. Do you want to police the sound as well? Yeah. But you know, yes, you might need to know what's happening, but also you know, your sound recordist is looking too. You know, they're not looking down the lens at what you're looking at. They might have noticed that your main protagonist that you didn't think was on the scene today has suddenly walked in to an area where they're not supposed to be, and they're going, oh, film there, and you're going, no, there's this thing going on that I have to film. You know, so I think it's about getting that relationship together, and some of the best films, I imagine, are certainly things that I've worked on. When you're getting on really well, that's when you make the best decisions. Was there another one, or shall I show some other clips? I don't know what to show you now, because I think maybe I should show you something from Sisters-in-Law, because we've talked about it a little bit. Can we skip, Rob? And I might go forward and back. Because I might come back to what actually is next. So, yeah, show the first Sisters-in-Law clip, and I'll shout stop when we need to.
In picking on blood. They ask it already, so anyway they can come. I just abandon everything. I can't see the situation. Women, they don't gather. Take it, put them for inside of my basin, so where you don't go inside, it's stop inside, or the whole basin of being blood. So now I just take it directly to the hospital. Then we enter the hospital, they just take it directly for theater.
You don't see it before?
The man is still on our house.
Okay, so it is still on our house. Now on a neighbor now.
It's not go buy a kitchen. Now I should go and keep it inside there. And tie my mouth and tie my hand.
Which kind of thing?
Pieces.
Pieces.
Red pieces.
She went and then hung on one of our members. So she was asked to go to their house, but she refused and started crying. So she called for us to come back and intervene. So when we came back, if you look at the eyes, you see blood in the eyes. Yeah. Then if you look at the back, some time ago she was badly beaten.
Baby, what be her name? Grace. Grace who?
Grace T.
T.
Manka, she's from Mancon.
You don't have many years? You do go school? Which school?
I think she attended Sacred Heart.
You know the name for our school? Now which school?
Sacred.
You know your teacher name?
Sorry, sometimes people are just devastated by the content of some of those clips, and we have to be calm. There's kids in a couple of those clips. I call them kids because they're very little children. And they're really quiet. I mean, and it can be a real problem to try and A, hear them, and B, kind of balance that with other people that are talking really loudly at the same time. That one of the main voice that you hear in that, the lady, is the state prosecutor, who you also saw in Larry's clip. And she won't mind me saying this, because I said this in a talk when she was there. was a little evasive every morning about having a personal mic put on. And I'd stand there very hopefully with my mic like this. Could I put the mic on you now, please? Oh, no, not now. I'm waiting in a moment. And of course, then something amazingly interesting would happen in her office. And we'd have to film it anyway, and I wouldn't have got the mic on her. Booms are all well and good. They're brilliant, sound great. But when you're stuck in a corner and you're trying to cover a whole office and you're trying to keep out of shot, you need some mics somewhere else. It was a very small room. We were sort of stuck behind the table that the state prosecutor was sat at. For the reason, we had separate sound. I wasn't cabled to the camera or anything, but anywhere else was potentially in shot. So I kind of had to be there. And then varying amounts of people would come in. Sometimes it would seem like the whole village came in. And they'd all have a different opinion about something, and you'd be trying to work out what was the piece that you should be recording, where was the story, a bit like you were saying. And some mornings, Vera would be sat there without her radio mic on, and the whole village would be there, and I'd be thinking, well, how do I get from there to there? In this big conversation that's going on. And of course, it's not possible. So what I used to do, which I hinted at earlier, was that she had a load of desk tidies and things on her desk, and I would pick a pencil, and I would blue tack my radio mic to the top of a pencil or behind the tray or something, so it was as near to where you'd want it to be as possible, and then I'd just hide the radio mic transmitter underneath something, a box of tissues or piece of paper or whatever. So it was there on her desk, as close as I could get, without actually getting it on her. Then you try and get it on her at a later point. So if she wandered off and did something, you were still covered. So I had her on one thing, and then the boom to cover everybody else, including the children that came in. And occasionally, if you've got a couple of people that you're trying to cover with a boom, and one of them's very quiet, what I would try and do, because you've only got the boom, you haven't got a choice, is I would get it very close to the person who was quietest, but then try and angle it so it was pointing towards the louder person too, but they'd be a lot further away, so that they were on mic but further away. So it's a compromise, but it meant you could actually hear the whole conversation. And I'm sure it's Larry.
That's a beautiful recording.
Thank you.
Even if you couldn't get the mic on her, I thought, I was wondering, are these neck mics, are these booms? The child seems good, the man is wonderful, and there's a relationship between all of them. That it's not flat, you're getting a lot of perspective. I just thought that was great.
Thank you. It's a film. It was nicely cut as well. Anything that was a disaster wasn't in the film, but it was a beautiful place to record. That office, we spent time negotiating to try and get it as quiet as possible as well. It was part of a very busy office complex. We sort of negotiated to. She's a very powerful lady. If she says that something's happening, it happens. And I'd recommend you to watch the film just because it's a really good film and she's brilliant. So if she asked people outside to be quiet, they were quiet. There was also, she had air conditioning in that room that sounded like a helicopter taking off. Very quickly we negotiated for that to be turned off. And there was something wrong with it. It had ice hanging off it. It was, not modern, up to date, apparatus. And so we did get her a fan, which was angled to be blowing not on where I'd put the mics. And I had the control of it so that when something interesting came on, I stood on the switch and it went off or went very low. So, we negotiated that. Also, again, it was another one of those places with a tin roof. So if it rained, it was really noisy. And a couple of times during scenes that are in the film, it began to rain while we were filming. And there was a particularly noisy bit right outside the window. There was something else below that had a tin roof. And we got some foam that they used to sell there for people to sleep on that was about that thick. And we bought enough to go on this tin roof and we stuck it on there. And it gave you about 10 minutes once it started to rain before it got sodden. and it wasn't absorbing any of the sound anymore. So that was a bit of a luxury, that we were there for a long time and we were able to see what the problems might be, and we were able to negotiate with people there to try and improve things a little bit. I mean, it didn't make all the problems go away, but just by, you know, looking and thinking, you could get around some of them. I see another hand.
When you're going to see multiple characters, how much of a discussion with the director would you have about what they're really looking for as a scene? Especially something like that where she's shooting and you're in a corner together. How much talking was there about what's the really dramatic impetus?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question, because in that instance then, none at all, because we didn't know that scene was going to happen. It wasn't like, oh, there's an appointment for a man to come home with a child. There were two children there, one who had been raped and one who had wandered into the back of a church and just attached herself to one of the church elders, and that man had basically just taken her home, discovered that she had been beaten and discovered her story and had brought her into the court. Those people just walked in while we were there. And in both cases, I think we got a kind of, oh, there's someone coming with a child, film. That was the discussion. So, yeah, it was completely on the busk. But we would evolve the story as it went along.
There must have been scenes where you did know what was going to happen, and in that point that were important for the narrative. I've seen it, and you must have discussed, we really need to get this.
Yes, we did. I mean, those scenes that we've shown, they would have been the beginning of a story. So there would be, right, we've got the beginning of that story, now we need something that advances that. We need a meeting with a lawyer, or we need, you know, the court case, or we need to meet the mother or whatever. So there would be a discussion around what was important. But of course, it's also in a third language, even though most of it's Pidgin English, there's some French in there as well. And I kind of got fairly, not kind of converse with the Pidgin English, but you can understand it if you hear a lot of it. So there would be key things that we would say, oh, that's important to know, so look out for that. And I would make sure that, I would also, that was shot on film, that was on 16mm film, which you got 10-minute rolls of film. So occasionally, if the film had run out, and I thought we might be getting to something important, I would carry on running while Kim changed film, so that there might be the end of something or the beginning of something important that I'd catch on sound that wasn't caught on camera, that could then be used in some way.
And so would you then also retrospectively fill in sounds that you knew you would have wanted for that room? If it started raining, would you then go back and, just that film because it's the last clip, but any film, how much of a responsibility for which wild tracks you got, do you think, are with you or with the director?
I would always see that as my job, to think of what would be needed in the edit and to make sure that at the very least you'd got the minimum that would make a scene cut together. So if you needed some atmos because, you know, the aircon had gone on halfway through, and you might want to pick where the aircon comes in rather than when it did, or you might want, or it might have gone off in the middle or whatever. I would see it as my responsibility to get those sounds if humanely possible. But yeah, director might also suggest things. And I think what sometimes happens is that sound recordists might have you know, a shopping list in their head of things that they might want, but then because there's a need or a wish by the director to rush on to something else, those things don't get done. So I think, again, that's you know, about your relationship between a director, a camera person and a sound recordist, to get all the things that everyone needs before you leave, if at all possible.
Just on that, actually, how much extra recording do you find you do on set?
On something like Sisters-in-Law, quite a lot, and I would go around collecting sounds as well for it and logging where they were on the tapes. It's kind of got easier, actually, because with digital recordings where you make a new file every time, you can on the fly, you know, record a lot of things, note down where they are, and even if you're in the middle of something, you can, you know, nip off and get something rather than thinking, gosh, this is going to be confusing when they come to sync it all up. You know, that there's this scene and then there's something else in the middle and something else, and it's all on a linear tape. But you know, with the solid state recording, it's, you know, I would always do that if I could. I mean, sometimes you don't get the opportunity to do it, and sometimes there's something else more pressing. Particularly with things like sister-in-laws, where there'd be a lot of sitting around, but then there'd be a furious activity around something that was happening.
Do you ever like kind of verbally slate things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything. I would, with those sort of films where it's all kind of very much on the fly, I would try and either verbally slate things or note things down where they were. I would have like a little notebook and note things down. And then in the evening, I'd go back and I'd make those notes a bit more comprehensive, so that they made sense for someone like Larry when they're going, oh, where can I find a door slam or whatever.
Do you record Atmos tracks in stereo?
Depends what I've got available. Generally, yeah, I mean something like Sisters-in-Law, where you're somewhere for a long time, I would, you know, spend a few hours with a stereo mic going around collecting things. But quite a lot of the time you've got what you're carrying, and you'll get it with whatever you've got. And sometimes the most important thing is for those Atmos tracks to match the dialogue that you've already recorded. So I would do it on the microphone that I had been using for the dialogue, because you know, take into account what Larry said before about, you know, manufacturing things afterwards, and it's always better to have all the things from the location. What the most important thing you need is all your dialogue as clean as you can, and with enough sound in between that to make a smooth track all the way through your scene. All the other stuff is brilliant, and you know, will help someone like Larry make a fantastic job of your scene, but it's icing on the cake.
Basically, I used to use it for amps and then mini disc. This is a really, really basic question, but what are you using now when it comes to recording?
Right, a lot of the stuff, I'm going to sort of break ranks here a little bit. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing at the moment gets recorded straight onto the camera, down a cable. So that's quite boring, really. But given the choice, I would record sound separately for all of the reasons that Larry eloquently described earlier. The recorder I've got for doing that, I've got a Sound Devices 744, which has a hard drive in it. It also has a little flash disk in it as well. There's various things like that. That particular one has 4 tracks, which I wish I'd had when I did Sisters-in-Law. It would have made life quite a lot easier.
So what was the name of the sound?
Sound Devices 744.
Sound Devices.
Yeah. Sound Devices are a company. They make a number of things, including that. They also make one with even more tracks now as well, if you really want to carry a lot of microphones and work out what you're going to do with them all. Does that answer your question? There's also like little Zoom recorders and things which someone mentioned, which are also very good. Yeah, yours was next, wasn't it?
Just when you're recording separately, what's your preference in keeping sync with camera? Are they expected for you to give them a wireless feed? Or
yeah, there's different.
Is timecode? Do they expect you to use timecode?
There's different ways of doing that, and I have to admit that a lot of the stuff I'm doing now, because it's cabled, I'm not having that conversation currently with people. There's only a quarter of an hour left. I've got so many things I could show you.
You can go on for a few more minutes.
Okay. I like answering questions, so just keep answering questions. Sisters-in-Law, it was on film, and we used timecode, and it was, it must have just been, it was a time of day timecode that's stamped on the camera and on the DAT. I quite like doing that. That's quite nice. But then there's questions about having enough run up to sync things up. That's getting to be less of an issue now. Everything's digital. So I'd love to work on something again like that, where you didn't have to worry about that quite so much. The other way of doing it, I work with a director called Mark Cadell, who does a lot of music films, and he self-shoots on a tiny little camera. We tried putting sound on it; it was rubbish, and I just said, I'm not doing that. I'm bringing my recorder. So he basically has the camera mic on, and that that is a guide track. And then I record separate sound. He tends to do very long takes, which help. We would record a piano lesson with someone, so he'd run for like 45 minutes. And then they would sync that sound up just from the guide track. And I would try and keep my tracks sensible. So there'd be like one long track, which was everything. And then anything else, if they were atmoses or anything else later, I would label them so they wouldn't be trying to sync up something that didn't exist. They would know that it was a world track. And it seems like a really ad hoc way of making a film, but it worked fine. I had to be talked into it. But it worked fine, and they used pluralize, which you've probably heard of, to sync it all up. Apparently it worked fine. I can show you a bit of that film if you like. It's clip number 8. Let me just say a little bit about it first. It's the story is, it's called Set the Piano Stool on Fire. It's a pianist called Alfred Brendel who was about to play his last concert, but he also had a very, last public performance. And he also had a pupil called Kit Armstrong, who's a very young guy, doesn't say much, doesn't like wearing a radio mic, neither does Alfred Brendel. That was an interesting thing, which we might talk about later. And this was sunk up using pluralize. It's playing the piano and then stopping and having a bit of a chat. Hopefully this next clip illustrates some of the things I was talking about.
Well, for the sound, you produce a nice sound, there's nothing to say, but it he's now 16 and things are progressing amazingly well, I think. I am always on my guard to sort of promise too much. There is the greatest talent and skill, but there is a danger that if things come so easily, there is the temptation to jump from one thing to the next. I have done this now, I can do it, I'm secure, so this goes back into the drawer and I shall move on to the next one. This can work for a certain while, but of course not in the long run, because when you practice, when you prepare a work, you don't only do it for the moment and for the next concert, but also for your future life, for the occasion when you may be nervous on stage and need a safety net, and for the later periods in your life where you need the reflexes of your brain to help you out in the long run. Yes, you need this. Not only the music needs it, but you need it to communicate with the whole. Also, of course, it's very important that one lives with pieces, maybe not constantly, but getting back to them in certain years and periods, and develop yourself by dealing with them, and also get on with the understanding of the pieces that will tell you what to do if you listen patiently. This is something that Kit still has to find out. Don't lay the blame on Schubert's door. Ask yourself, what can I do with these bars? Did he really mean it to be so perfunctory? Play it as if you would be overawed by something. A kind of very gentle ecstasy. crescendo here and quite a bit of it, not before. Very good, you can do it on stage like that. But
we spent days like that. Yeah, what was I going to say about that? Yeah, there was a bit where, Alfred Brendel was another character who didn't like to wear a radio mic, and the director decided that I shouldn't try and press that, so I didn't. So all of that was on a boom. And obviously it was a film about music, so you're trying to get the music recorded reasonably well as well, given that it was a piano with the lid down, which doesn't help to get a great sound out the piano. The piano also had so many things stacked on it that you couldn't have got to the lid to raise it anyway. So I actually had a mic on a stand set back from the piano to get the main piano sound. I would have loved to have done that in stereo. I just didn't have enough gear to do it. That was on a wireless link, so I wasn't attached to it, so I could move around. I didn't want to be attached to anything. As you see, Alfred's, you could see by the way that he moved, he was quite unpredictable, and he wanted to be able to move around. And we did occasionally go around behind him, but behind the piano as well, although it was very, very cramped. We were moving around each other and trying not to get in their way. I also found that having the boom over the top of them, it enhanced the sound of the piano as well, given that I had one a little bit distant. The only bit of the piano that was open was the bit nearest the keys. And to have the microphone over that as well really enhanced the piano. So I was trying to record the piano with that as well, and then when they'd finished playing the piano, whack it up so that I could hear them talking. And you could hear that's one of the reasons why I used that clip. There's a bit where they were kind of talking across the music, and it was really difficult, and you hear when they suddenly, get loud again. So it was quite difficult, but at the end of it, Alfred Brendel actually said that he thought that the piano sounded really good. So I was really pleased with that, because he's the virtuoso pianist. So if he thought it was okay, I think it was okay. There was another piece I was going to play you when I actually recorded the piano properly with some microphones kind of around it, but I won't. It was just vanity. I was going to play that for you to show that there are other ways of recording the piano that aren't with a boom over the top of some people. And I like the sneeze, I think. You mentioned sneezing, didn't you, in your piece? I can't remember. You also mentioned saxophones, right? You were quite rude about them. I played the saxophone.
Oh, no, I love saxophones.
I got your point.
What kind of microphone did you use on the piano?
I have a pair of mics that I use for MS stereo, a pair of Sherps mics. It's a CCM 41, I think, that I use as the cardioid, which is slightly wider than the rifle mics that you end up using, well, quite a bit wider than the mic that I've normally got on my boom. So I used that. I mean, it was one of those films where there wasn't a lot of money, so you used what you had. So yeah, that's what I used for that. Please go ahead.
Ideally, sorry, to film a piano, where would you to record a piano? Sorry, where would you have placed the microphone?
When I did it properly, the lid was up for a start, and there's sort of two sort of sounding holes in the piano. It's kind of difficult to describe without having a piano, but I had two. I used AKG 414s, which is sort of a switchable pattern mic on the kind of the widest setting that they have, the cardioid setting, so that one side is live, and put that side down to the strings. Have two of them in there, and also what I did and what I do is not gospel. Is I had another similar set of mics on a stand further away, so you had the option to mix between the two, and the guy dubbing it really liked it. And that's the thing about you talked about using music in films and in documentaries, and yeah, a lot of the time it is a no-no, but then obviously some films you make that are about music, and you might take a piece of music that you recorded like in a scene like that, and you might use it elsewhere in the scene to make a point about coming back to somewhere. So I've done that quite a lot, where I've recorded music as part of a scene, but then it's been used somewhere else. I'm not going to show any more clips now. I'm just going to answer questions until someone tells us to stop.
I'd just back to talking about gear you use. You said you don't like radio mics so much, but obviously you have to use them. What radio mics would you suggest?
Well, I've got, and I've sort of almost stuck with them out of habit. I've got some audio limited 2040s, which they're very good. We've all basically had to rebuy radio mics, all our sound recorders, because the government's changed the frequencies that we can use. So we've kind of, a lot of us have looked at different ones. I went with the same ones that I had before for financial reasons, really, because all the other accessories I've got fit them. But there's also, a lot of people went for electrosonic radio mics, which have got a very good reputation. Microns have got a very good reputation. Sennheiser do a whole range of radio mics, some which are very expensive and some a bit more budget, like the one I've got in my pocket.
Yeah, what's for the budget?
For the budget conscious, this is a Sennheiser, this is an EW100 G3. There's G4s as well, they're quite good actually. What I would suggest, if you buy them, they come with the sort of mic that I'm wearing, which I think is a Sennheiser mic. I would suggest change that for something else, like a Sanken COS 11 or a Tram. They're the flat ones that you get the vampire clips for that someone mentioned earlier.
Why? What's wrong with those? What's wrong with the ones that come with it?
Don't sound very good.
No.
And they're hard to hide.
When you're listening to a room, are you only listening to what you hear and you're monitoring, or do you have one ear kind of also hearing what might be going on elsewhere?
Oh yeah, it depends what you're recording. I mean, if you're on a documentary where you're following something, I'd be trying to listen to other stuff as well. You can't listen to everything. And like sometimes you might have several radio mics up and people wander off and leave the room, and you have to kind of keep a track of where people are and whether you should be fading them down because they've gone outside and are involved in some other scene you're not filming. Yeah, and then, but also sometimes when you're just concentrating on one thing and you know you're not going to like be moving from that, I would just be concentrating on what I could hear and whether background noise from outside was interfering. So it depends on the situation. Really, some of the mixers now, the sound mixers that we carry have a useful facility on them that's called pre-fade listen, or you might know it as Q if you're from radio, and it allows you to listen to something without fading it up first. And I've done a few things where you might be going from place to place. Say I did something that was about teaching maths in schools. It was about the fact that kids can't count or do their tables anymore. And we were filming in 2 classrooms that were both teaching maths at the same time. And because I had a radio mic on a teacher in each classroom, I could hear the teacher next door on my pre-fade to know if something more interesting was happening in there than was happening in the classroom we were in. So, you can do that, but you can also go mad trying to listen to everything at once. You've obviously got to concentrate on what's being recorded too. Yeah.
Sorry, it's stupid. Have you had any funny moments that you recorded by mistake or?
I'm probably not allowed to say. Okay. The thing is, this is back to the Gordon Brown thing again as well, actually, that, he got recorded saying something that he didn't intend to be recorded, and then that got broadcast to the whole world. And when you put radio mics on people, they are sort of, to get them on them in the first place, they're trusting you not to be indiscreet with things that they might say, and I have sort of views about how I would deal with that personally that might change depending on who the person was and what they were saying, because we're all human, but you do overhear things, and sometimes you keep them to yourself, and sometimes you fade things out. Well, you put mics on people and they say, "Oh, you won't listen to me in the toilet, will you?" That happens all the time. And you say, "Why on earth would I want to listen to you in the toilet?" I mean, I've occasionally faded up a microphone and heard someone in the toilet and faded it straight back down. It's not interesting. I mean, no, really not. So, you have to you know, I've spoken today about 2 people that weren't that keen to wear radio mics. Things like that are probably the reason. So, you know, I think you owe it to them to have some integrity, that when they do trust you to put a mic on them, that you're going to use that in a way that uses your brain and not somebody else's. That's probably controversial, isn't it? Now, was there a cue? You were next, I think.
Can I just quickly, sorry to ask again, but what boom mics would you recommend in each?
That's okay. The kind of the industry standard one, which I think Larry mentioned before, would be a Sennheiser 416. There's a number of things that are similar to that, and maybe, I don't know, maybe better, I don't know. I personally have a Sennheiser MKH60. They're both quite directional, and that for me is what I generally want, because I am trying to exclude things. I'm trying to pick what sounds I want to record. Obviously, you know, things like very loud traffic noise, you don't have any choice. But I can angle it away from the road and I can get as little of it as possible. So those directional mics allow you to do that. The other one that I've got is a Sherps, and please don't ask me to spell that, maybe somebody else can. CMIT, C-M-I-T, and it's very easily spotted if anyone's using one. It's blue, bright blue. And I quite like that for environments where you're working in kind of boxy rooms where the acoustic maybe isn't brilliant, because somehow it just seems to, it doesn't get rid of that echo and horrible acoustic, but it seems to make it sound real, rather than, you can get some rather odd effects, the way that particularly microphones, all those directional microphones, while they pick up mainly from the front, they also pick a little bit up from the back as well, which colours the acoustic, particularly if you're in a little boxy room. The Sherp seems to do that either a bit less or in a more subtle way. Yeah, I actually bought that when I was working on a job where we were in and out of little boxy rooms and had no option but to record that way. So it did improve things a bit. MKH60? 60, yeah. Right, I don't know who was... okay, sorry, I couldn't see you there.
Hi, maybe I should talk to you afterwards or email you or whatever, but I was just wondering what your advice would be for someone who's interested in getting into sound recording specifically, kind of as a career, maybe hopefully long term, aside from doing some of the like courses which I know are available. So I found it quite, it just seemed, again, maybe it's another victim of the recession and all that, it's quite hard to kind of...
Yeah, to break in. Yeah, it's difficult because... there's as many routes as there are sound recordists, probably. Yeah. I mean, I went on a film course. I went to Bournemouth University, but it's kind of almost immaterial that I did that, because it was more about the people I met while I did that than, you know, it's a very good course, and I wouldn't want to. I'm not dissing that in any way. It was a great thing to do, but it's more about getting those, finding those people that will let you do the sound on their film. There's lots of people working without sound recordists. I would hope that if you have something to offer them, they would want to accept that. But you know, for various reasons that Larry also talked about. I'm referencing Larry a lot. Anyone who's just seen my video, you're going to have to watch Larry's as well, okay, to make it make sense. Yeah, I mean, if you can't find anyone that will let you record their film, just go and record anyway. Go and do something else. You know.
I'm happy to meet someone to record my film.
There you go. Have a conversation. I mean, it is coming to things like this and meeting other people that are doing things that will maybe get you that opportunity. The other thing, I mean, I get a lot of people that email me and say, "Oh, can I come and be your assistant?"
I saw your website. You said, "Please don't."
Yeah. I try and say that in a polite way as possible. Yeah. But you know, and I say on there for various boring reasons, mostly to do with insurance and employment. I can't turn up and go, "Oh, this is my work experience person." It doesn't work like that. But if you approach a production company, they might let you in, maybe even to do something else that will then allow you to either sit with the sound recordist that's there, or if they haven't got a sound recordist, you might end up doing the sound. You know, that's maybe not the best recommendation in the world, but it might work for you. And I did, before I went to university, I worked on a few sort of corporate films, and the workshop, the video workshop movement was still alive then, and I think there are still vestiges of that around, where people will get together sort of in a cooperative way and make a film with begged or borrowed equipment. And if you can find those people, that's also another good way to learn, and to learn for free. But there is a danger then that you are reinventing the wheel by having to learn by yourself rather than having someone that will mentor you. So I appreciate that that's a real problem, and I don't really know how to address that.
My church and learn about the sound, the mixer.
Yeah, well, there's lots of other
way of,
ways. I mean, I've recently discovered community radio, and there's lots of people making lots of sound mistakes in community radio, but it's a very safe place to make them, because no one's going to go back and check your work, 20 years later when you're doing something else amazing, that you learnt somewhere else and you didn't know the difference between mic and line and got it all wrong. So, find somewhere safe to experiment would be I suppose my best bit of advice, and to volunteer for things and be there when someone says, oh, we need someone to record our film. You go, that's me. Hope that helps a bit.
Last question here. Oh, that's me, yeah. I was just going to ask a bit about how you work with Kim when you're away making sister-in-law. It sounds like you're really talking quite a lot between you about the story and what you're looking for, and you're totally across, are you? What you're looking out for?
Yeah, in that situation, yeah, and I think particularly when you're doing something that's not in your language, you have to, you're looking out for other cues all the time, and there might be something that I might catch that she missed, or vice versa. So you do have to work together, and we would sit and have long conversations in the evening about, I might occasionally, do you realise, that she said this? Oh no, I didn't realise that. Good job you were listening. And then it was right, because we've got that. We now need to clarify what that meant. It kind of goes back to a question someone else asked. But yeah, so you'd be looking for things. That was a very difficult shoot actually for lots of reasons. It's quite hilarious looking back on it. Kim had malaria for half of it, so that was kind of interesting.
Okay, I think we're going to let you stop there and say thanks very much.
Thank you very much.